Hello there guys, it's Joey. So this is going to be a book recommend, book review, book look at for the Book of the Great Queen by Morpheus Ravenna. The Many Faces of the Morrigan from Ancient Legends to Modern Devotions. I was asked if I would recommend books on the Morrigan other than the Stephanie Woodfield book that people have read, and I had intended to do this video anyway, so here we go. And first and foremost, I do have the window open, so I apologise if you can hear any traffic, but it's too warm not to. It shouldn't be too bad, but if you can hear anything, I apologise. Okay, so I'm going to give you my overall impressions, and then we're going to go through some of the book. We're going to look at certain bits so you can see for yourself, because I think it's important to have a look and get a feel, I guess, for what you would be purchasing. So this book is actually a new release, a fairly new release. I think it was released about maybe a month ago, maybe. And it was, I think it was £20 in English money, obviously, and it came relatively quickly by delivery. It's quite a big book. It's quite a thick book, and I do recommend it. I'm going to say that there are a couple of things that I'm going to go over and mention that I think people should be aware of, and that's more to do with style than anything else. It's a fantastic book for gaining information, but it does come across as far more of a textbook than perhaps the Woodfield book does, and perhaps other varying sources might. It gives very little insight into the person's personal relationship with the Morrigan. There are some of her poems, but not many. And there are some suggestions at devotional practices, but it takes a huge backseat to an overall textbook study style writing, I guess, that focus very much on the etymology, the root of language, as well as the lineage and ancestry of the goddesses, as well as taking great pains to go over the resources. So it comes across very much as a sort of logical, studious study of the available material, and sort of justifying interpretations of that material through the material itself. It comes across like an essay that one might read in university, or diplomas and within the realm of higher education and so on. It's very well thought out. It's very informative. It's very logical, and I don't mind the style particularly at all. I don't mind that because I consider myself educated and I can embrace that sort of style, but I don't know that everybody would. In some respects it does lack a little bit of the personal. There are personal poetries in there, and there are suggestions of ways to worship, but overarchingly it focuses on notions and ideas and concepts rather than giving you a glimpse into personal practice. I think that the Woodfield book is more personalised in that respect. In the Woodfield book you get more of a sense of, this is my personal practice, and this is how I say things in ritual, and this is how I lay things out in ritual, as well as covering some of the history. But this comes across much more as a historical textbook, and as such it's required me to read through bits and pieces and then put it down. It's not a book that I could read, or from beginning to end quickly, for a number of reasons. One, there's far too much information to take in to be doing it that way. It's not one of these books where you feel like the author is having a in-depth personal conversation with you. It's very much, it feels textbook. It feels very much, that you are learning the information, you're taking the information on board, and it's setting you up for a basis of your own practice. So it's fantastic in that manner. I think that as long as you're expecting that, it's a really wonderful resource. Right, let's see which pages we can come across. Okay. Right. So the first chapter is about the Irish law. And here it talks about how you should best approach looking at particular text, talking about, the Christianization of text. It gives us story cycles, it gives us cycles that we should look at. It talks about specific texts in quite some detail. It talks about prose. It talks about the root of language an awful lot, the etymology. And this is clearly the author's intellectual connection to the myth, and something they feel is important, to examine the root of language. In a lot of ways I fully understand and can reinforce that idea because of the Celtic language being oracular. It was spoken and not written down, although obviously most of the myths are from written sources. But it's worth bearing in mind that if that's something that's going to grate on you, then it's worth noting that is there. It is a focus of the book. I don't mind it at all. I think it makes sense. Let's see what else. So there's all these sources. This is all Irish law, and there's a lot of it. So you see, we're going through. We've got to page 40, just on Irish sources alone. Then it discusses the faces of the Morrigan. This confused me slightly because the author seems at first to very much dismiss the idea of certain triads. So she seems to suggest that seeing the Morrigan in terms of a maiden mother crone goddess as this modern pagan worship isn't something that is ideal, and she particularly focuses then on saying that it should be Bave, Morrigan and Nivun. And the thing that doesn't make huge amounts of sense to me following is then you have a chapter on Bave, Macha, and then Anu, and then Nivun, but Nivun in with others. So that didn't make huge amounts of sense to me. That's only the only one real criticism of the book that I have. I'm not criticising it by saying that it comes across as a textbook. I think it has a very good place within one's study, and that sort of style doesn't bother me at all, but that is something people should be aware of for sure. And this though is odd to me, and I don't know, it's you see here that the mythological tradition tends to present a triad of Bave, Morrigan and Macha or Navun, and sort of, you know, it sort of dismisses modern interpretation as Anu being part of it, and then there is a chapter for her. Side note, the art is lovely. The art is really pretty. If that, you know. But then there's a chapter on these goddesses, going into detail. Again, it focuses on their myths, it focuses on the language used, it's heavy on quoting things and sort of really sort of looking at the intimate relationships between symbology and the goddess, and who that makes them from language, from the text sources, trying to arrange a sort of intellectual debate, if you like. There are some, you know, it goes through the very many different varying faces of each particular goddess. So you see Anu, and it's tying Anu in with Danu, rather than the Morrigan, but then saying, you know, the paps of Anu and certain correlations between story. It's felt a bit like the author was unsure as to the nature of Anu, or whether to include Anu, and then did. I'm not sure about that one particular point. I may go over and read it again. But this is what I mean right here. The etymological meaning and source of her name remain contested and ambiguous, and the quantity of material concerning her is scant in comparison with some of the other Morrigana divinities. Yet the traces we do find leads us deeper into the Celtic worldview and the heart of its conception of sacredness. The term Nem in Irish refers to sky heaven, or that which is above, which accentuated as Nem means lustre or radiance. And that's very much typical of how the book talks, how the author presents their arguments. Okay. We then have a chapter focusing on the poetry of Morrigan and what the recorded versions of her poems are, which is nice. It gives the poems here, it gives a translation next to it, and it discusses each individual point. As a analysis of the available material, this book shines. It presents the sources, in complete depth, giving translation, and then analysing the poetry. So this is the real strength of the book for certain. Then we have, plenty more of the poetry, and, plenty more of the notes going through line by line. More prophecy. Okay. Right. So we get halfway through the book, and we get to the part of the book which is supposed to be focused very much on the practice of following the Morrigan, and the idea is to give an overview of the ancient people's way of doing it, and then present a different way of doing it, a living practice. So this is the first chapter with land, sanctuary, tomb and temple. It discusses places and land and concepts again. So basically, when I was coming to this chapter, this halfway through the book, I thought there would be a shift, and I thought it would be very much about one's personal interpretation of one's relationship to each individual concept. It sticks to its textbook format and does seem to describe the mythology, again the root of language, and focus on that. And you know, the bits where it suggests things for you to do is scant, and I'm just trying to find the first one. So these are all places which are sacred. Just trying to find if again, these are all just lists of places and explanations of places and how they're connected. Okay, so we then get to page 208, and there is some idea of personal practice. And it talks about relationships to the personal spirits of where you live, when you can't get to particular places which may or may not be sacred to particular deity. But there isn't a whole lot of this. Speak directly to the spirits of your land, to the ancestors of place, and any spirits who live here. Greet them on. Introduce yourself, who you are, any lineage you represent. Acknowledge you are sharing the space with them. Make offerings. Ask for their consent and support in the work you have to do, and listen. Be willing to make this a regular practice. Relationships develop over time. In my practice, I begin every major ritual with greeting and offering to local and land spirits, and maintain a practice of periodically checking in with them to learn what needs they have, how my practice is impacting or benefit them, and how I can be an ally to them. So basically it assumes a level of understanding to know how to do that and why you need to do that. I guess it does explain why you need to do that, because of the idea of the sacredness of land in such depth being linked to particular places. But it does expect a level of understanding. This is probably a book for those who are a little bit further along on their path rather than a beginner's book. It talks here a little bit about altars. What the primary use of an altar was for the preparation of offerings, typically sacrifices. So it does talk a little bit about altars here. There we go, and so on. There is a list I did see somewhere, and I can't remember which page it was on, where it does list some of the things that you could give in offering. I think I might have gone past it. And then there is some of her poetry, which is yeah, there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 pages of her poetry, and then here we have some offering ideas. Then it talks about sacrifice, and this chapter is going to depend on your feelings. The author makes a case for animal sacrifice in this chapter. I'm not going to say any more about that. I'm going to leave that entirely up to your own feelings on the subject. does talk about blades of offering as well. Celts threw blades into rivers. Let's see, is there anything else we need to cover in our flicking through? As you can see, there's an awful lot of text. There are very few pictures. If that sort of thing bothers you, it doesn't bother me whatsoever. I don't mind. But you know, if you're expecting diagrams on how to lay out things or things like that, then it doesn't really... See, this is what I mean. It talks here about raven knowledge and animal omens, and then doesn't give you any examples, I don't think. No, not there anyway. It gives plenty of examples and things that may seem as... It's sort of, you know, these are suggestions, and then you have to go maybe research it on your own, which is no bad thing. I understand the not wanting to divulge too much of one's personal path, and to allow people to develop their own. Let's see. So this is examples of sorcery, prayer work, and within the Celtic pantheon. And again, this talks about different things that we see within the text. Geis being one, binding being another. It will not provide you with any particular spell work to do with the Morrigan, I don't think. Well, there is a blessing milk prayer from the texts. Okay, so there are some. There are some from the text. That's what I meant to say. They're not personal ones. Petitions for assistance, invocation. So there we go. Battle compass. Let's flick through that one. Lessons you can learn from the lessons of the texts. Combat ordeals. Initiation. Okay, it's a huge book. I don't want to sort of overread too much. I don't want to ruin it for people. Ooh. Ancestral rights, okay. Yeah, okay. So there's a prayer for the ancestors in here. There's one. And yeah, okay, that's pretty much it. Right. So this is not a in-depth covering of personal collection of spells and rituals and prayers, if that is something that you are looking for. It does provide some examples of that information from the author's personal practice. That isn't completely void. There are, you know, there are some examples in there, but the overarching focus is on the text material, and how you feel about that is somewhat personal. I think it's important to be aware and have read and have studied the material myself. I think it becomes important to go beyond it as well. And if you have trouble finding the source material, this book presents a lot of it in one volume, which is really nice. And it sort of gives quotes and examples and translations in a lot more depth as well, which I believe is less so in the Woodfield book. So as a resource material, this book is fantastic. It's definitely worth a read. It's definitely worth delving into that. It's not going to be for everybody because of the way it's presented as a very intellectual discussion surrounding the roots of words and texts and source-based material. And it's taken me a few sit-downs and reading bits and pieces to get a real feel for it. But I fully endorse it. I fully recommend it. I think it's definitely worth having as part of your Morrigan research and discovery. So this is a book I definitely recommend. I was asked to recommend another Morrigan style book. This really can help further you and your study of the Morrigan, which is an important part of one's practice, in my opinion. So that's it for this video. Many blessings.